So we're going to be creating some elements using JavaScript in the create element method, also attaching them to the page, and then adding event listeners on click to the elements, and then applying different styling properties to the elements that we're creating. We only are starting with the one HTML element, which is going to be the input with the type of color. The two buttons on the page are being created dynamically with JavaScript, and then they're interactive. So if we select a color and we click Save Color, that's going to save the colors within an array in the background. And then what we can do is we can list out the colors. When we press the List Colors button, that's going to create a bunch of spans on the page using the array of colors. So if we press it again, it's going to create another set of spans. These spans are going to have a click event. So if you click them, it's going to remove the span from the page. And you can see that within the HTML. So this is going to be a way to practice interacting with and selecting page elements, creating page elements, and then updating the style properties of the page elements. Created an HTML file, and we just have the one input field. That's the only element on the page, linking to a JS file, so a JavaScript file, and this is where we're going to be making the manipulations of the DOM page. The browser is opened on the right-hand side to the web page, and I've also got the console, the developer tools console, opened at the bottom of the page. So first off, let's go ahead and we're going to select the input. And I'll just create a variable called myInput, and using the document query selector, we'll select the input from the page. You can also be specific, so if you have more than one input, you can specify it by the type, or you can give it an ID or a class name in order to be more specific with the input that you're selecting. So go ahead and add it in as input type, and that's going to be contained within the square brackets, and that will allow us to select that element. And to make sure that the element is selected, I'm just going to type the my input into the console, so that selects that element. Now when the element is selected and updated, I want to store that updated information. So we're going to create an array, and this is what we're going to use in order to store all the different colors that get selected, and then we'll create elements on the page that we can add content into. So let's go ahead and we're going to create an element, and using the document create element allows us to create elements with JavaScript, and then we need to attach this element to the page. So we don't have any content in this div. If I console log out the element with the variable name of main, that gives us this div, but it's not present on the page yet. So we want to add it to the page, and we can select the document body object, and using the prepend, this gives us an opportunity to add the element to the page, and then we just need to specify what element we want to prepend to the document body. So now if we go over into the HTML, underneath the body, there's our element that we've created. And this is where we can add in different elements and content using JavaScript as we progress through the lesson of this course. So now let's make an event listener on the input, and we can select on change. So this will fire off a function whenever there's a change detected on the input element. So we can also console log just to make sure that we're capturing the change that it's happening. And then we can add in a block of code and have an action for the change. So once we click off and once focus is removed from the element, that's when the change takes place. So we can change it, and then we click off and we get the change result there. So we want to be able to select the input value from that element, and we can select it either using the myInput. We can reference the myInput in a number of ways with the JavaScript code. So we can pass in an event object and select it as the eTarget, and that will reference the current element that invoked the event. So when we click off of it within the console, we're referencing that current element. We can also reference it using the name of the element. So we can select it as the myInput, and that will also return back the value. So if we want to get value of the element that was referenced, this is how we can get the value of the element. So both of those are going to be producing the value. The one that you can't do, and that one that won't work when we're doing the arrow format, and this is going to be one of the differences between using the arrow format and the function keyword, is if you try to use this And once we select it, this object is actually referring to the entire window object. So it's not referring to the element that invoked the function. And if we update this to be back to the normal function keyword, that's actually going to start working. So we're going to be able to reference it with this. So if you are using the arrow format, you need to select from one of the two options. If you are using the function keyword, then you can select from the third option in order to get the value that was input. I'm also going to create a button and add the button to the page. I'm going to add the button into main. And what this button will do is this will give us a way to store the value. So within the button, we're going to create just a button element and then add that button. It's the same way that we added it to the document body, but in this case we already have an object that we're adding it into, which is going to be main, and then adding it into the button. And I'm going to go ahead and append it into the button. The button now is on the page. It's really small, so let's add in some text within the button so that we can actually see the button content. And we can set that within the button content, and this will say save color. And we'll create an array that's going to save the colors of the buttons. Can also open up within the HTML elements, and within the div that we've created, that's where we've got the save button. So that's where that button is going to be set. And also if we wanted to add it to the end of the page or before the color option, we can also prepend it before. So that will position the button in a different spot within the HTML. So that we've got the input, we've got the div, and then we've got the button. In order to change the order, you can just set the different order that the items are being added into, the statements are being sent within the code, and that will change the order. So now we've got the div that we're referencing as a variable of main, the button, and then the input value. So let's add in an event on the button itself, and we'll select the button using the button, and then add the onClick event to the button. And then this is going to fire off when the button is clicked. So add the click event. And also let's wrap up what we've got with the myInput, where we're going to change the styling of the document body. So that's the element that we're selecting, and update the style property. And we'll set the background color of that element to whatever we've got for the input value, and save that. So now when we select and we click off the button, that's going to update the background color. We've got a save, which will allow us to save the content of the selection, and that's what we wanted to do with the button click, where we're going to save it into the holder array, and also create some elements on the page that we can visually see, and then we can also click those and make the color changes. So that will give us a way to store various colors that we've selected into the array, and then switch back to those colors as needed. And they're going to do the same thing whenever they're clicked. They're going to update the background color to that value for the selection within the array. So now let's add those items into the array, where when the button gets clicked, we can take within the holder and push a value into the holder. And the value that we're saving is going to be the value from the myInput. And we can reference it this way, where we've got the myInput, and output that into the myMain. So do the text content, and we can set that as the array values. And JavaScript will automatically output that. You can also do a conversion and change it to string. So we can include the toString method, and that will convert the array into a string. So now whenever I click and I click off of it, if I press the save color, that will add the color into the array and save that. Now we don't have to even click off. If we select it and we press the button, that will automatically save it, and we'll click off of the button and the input select option. So now let's add in some buttons on the page that we can add and we can press to navigate to the different colors that we have that's being stored within the array. And we can use the index values, so adding in some buttons on the page, and every time the button is clicked, so we're adding a new item that's being stored. So now let's also add in a new button. So these are the dynamically created buttons. So using the document create element, we'll create a button, and then take the button and append it to main. So main gets the button appended to it. Let's add some text to the button. So the text content of the button. And this can maybe just say the color of the input value. So it'll change it to that color. So when we do a save, it's adding in those buttons on the page. And I'm going to remove out that we're writing the text color onto the string, and we're going to be saving it to the background. That's why we were not able to add additional buttons, and now we've got a bunch of buttons. So we want to make those buttons clickable. So with the button 1, we can add a click event, or we could use the onClick method. And whenever the button is clicked, then we want to update the background with whatever current button value it is. So we want to be also able to track the value of the button. And we have a couple options where we could store it and select its index value. So on click, we can sort out which button has been clicked, and depending on how many buttons are on the screen, we can also get the value of the text content off the button and set the background color to that value. So that's another option that we have, where we can simply just get the text content of the button. And we don't have to go into the array. We can also update the button style content. So button 1 style, and let's set the style of the button 1 for the background color, and we can also set that to the my input. So that will give us another visual for the button that's been set. And also let's update the style of the button to have a white font or style, and this should be color, and then set that to white. So that gives us buttons with whatever color we've selected. And we're also tracking these within the array. So we've got a full list of the colors. So I'm going to add another button to the page. And then this can just create some elements that are going to list out the various button colors. And I'll also do a prepend for this. And what this one will do is this is going to have just a list out and create a brand new list of those and set that to be the text color for button 2. So there's our list, and we can add an event listener to that button. So the same as we've done with the click of the normal button, we can add the event on the click of the new button that we just created. And within this button, let's go ahead and we're going to list through what we have for the holder array. So we can create a list of values, and we might want to just create a bunch of elements. So we'll do that where we'll create some elements, and these can be spans. So document element, and the elements that we're creating are going to be spans. And I'm going to loop through what we have for holder. So using for each. So we're going to create a bunch of elements and add them to the page. The L value is actually going to be the color value, and then nest the creation of the span within the loop. So we're looping through the whatever number of items we have within the holder. For the where we're appending it, we're going to append it, the span, and append that to the main element. And then for the span, set the background color, and set the background color to be whatever we've got for the value of L, which is actually going to be the value within the holder. So let's create a few saves, and we're listing out the spans. So let's take a look and see what we've got within the page. So we've got the span there, but we don't have any content within the span. So let's update this span. We'll set some properties on the span. So for the span style, set a width of 50 pixels, span style, and a height of 50 pixels. And these need to be string values that it's expecting. So add in those string values. And I'm actually going to change this. So when we list out the colors, we're still not getting any content within the span because the spans by default, they're not going to be listed as blocks. So take the span and we can convert that to style, and the display style for this converted into an inline block. So that will allow us to have the different height properties for the elements. Let's take a look and we'll see what we've got for the spans on the page. So there's the first span that we've created, and this actually should be style. That's why the background color wasn't showing. So save. So that's going to list out and just create elements from the ones that we have. So list out a bunch of squares with those spans. So let's add some properties to the spans where we make them when the button gets clicked. So add an onClick event to the span. What we'll do is we'll just remove the span. And this actually should be a function. So create some more spans on the page, and this will create a bunch of spans, and then we can click them and they're going to disappear off the page. Whereas when we click the button, they're going to update the background colors to whatever the background color is on the button itself. So that's how we can create some interaction and update some styling of the page elements using the JavaScript and interacting with the JavaScript DOM, and dynamically create page elements. If you open up the HTML within the div that we created, we've got a bunch of buttons, and we also have a bunch of spans there as well. And these are all dynamically created with JavaScript code. So go ahead and try it out, and you'll be ready to move on to the next lesson.